Back with me on the Future Forecast podcast is my good friend Courtney Wheaton. Tonight we're going to do a dive into some spirituality and some ways to navigate the negativity that is floating around the world. Courtney, how are you, my friend? It's so good to see you.
I am well. It is so good to see you too. We haven't chatted in a while, so you're one of my favorite people to talk to. So this is
I
fun.
know I always enjoy when we can get on here. I walk away from our conversations feeling so much lighter, actually, even when we have handle those really heavy topics. So I'm looking forward to see where this is going. We were talking before the show. Actually, you wanted to talk about a Star Trek experience that you had.
I did. So because yeah, I was kind of pondering uh what the heck you and I were going to discuss tonight, and
Yeah,
because I know for me a lot of stuff lately that's been coming up a lot is more of the spiritual side of the house.
yeah.
And while I was making dinner tonight, I was just had YouTube on, and there's a movie reviewer that I adore. His name is the Critical Drinker. He's Scottish, and he just rips up modern cinema in a really lovely, visceral way.
Yeah.
Anyway, he did a review of this Star Trek short film that
Hmm.
recently got put out. The title of it is called 765874 Unification. And it was put out by, I think, the Roddenberry Archive folk. And it was like 8 minutes. William Shatner, they de-aged him,
Right.
and they had a kind of a CGI Leonard Nimoy, but it was this whole experience, and it was silent. There was no talking, but it was just watching Spock or in Captain Kirk. So it's his
Hmm.
journey from death through the garden into the afterlife. And he's sort of facing all of those elements of himself, like the young, brash captain that we get in the original
Right.
one. And, when he's like the admiral and all of
Yeah.
those faces of himself that we see. And then he also crosses over into the Calvin timeline with that a lot of us Star Trek people don't quite care for. And he's able to encounter Spock and be with him on his deathbed in this whole other parallel
Wow.
universe.
Yeah.
And I cried the whole freaking, I'm surprised I don't look like a wreck because I was at my kitchen table just bawling. It's like 8 minutes
Right.
of just amazing, intense stuff. And it really got me kind of thinking because so much of us are Star Trek has been on the air, our entire lives,
Yeah.
essentially, especially if you're like
Yeah.
Gen X,
Right.
you know. Um, it's always been around, and it's always had this external focus of space, the final frontier, like going out. And I loved that this had such an inner experience
Yeah.
of like the crossing over of death and having to face yourself being the final frontier. Um, so yeah, I was like, I don't know how we can segue into that, but I'm still really kind of like emotionally like
Yeah, you're
touched.
processing it too. But I think that's so important. And I think a lot of us on this journey, we have these external experiences, right? Something happens. I have a paranormal experience. I see something, or I read something, or whatever. It's external to us. And the more we explore it, right, and the more we're looking out, I think we ultimately end up looking in and doing
Yeah.
that inner work and having those experiences. And it sounds like obviously you have the nostalgia piece, being such a huge fan of Star Trek. And then the relatable piece to that too, understanding that he's doing the inner work at the end of his life that someday, we may go through as well. I mean, that sounds like a very powerful piece.
It was beautiful. And
Yeah,
for a lot of folks, especially because I think one of the struggles that, especially if you're a media fan, which I am, I
yeah,
relate so much through TVs, movies, all of that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And we've
me too.
seen how there's been like a degradation of story the
Yeah.
last, like 15 years or so.
Uh-huh.
This
Yeah.
century has not been kind to media. Um, and it was the best, like this little 8 minute short is the best thing that they've put out related to Star Trek in almost 20 years, you know.
It's no coincidence that you say that. I've been having a thought a lot lately of just how story, movie, books, just anything creative. I mean, I think that's part of the human collective consciousness. And I think that's part of our experience, as if I always envision like whatever the higher power is here, right? Whatever the purpose here of this existence, it was thinking one day like, how else can I up the HP or the experience points of people here, right? Well, they can't all go have all these experiences, but we can watch a movie, we can read a book, and we can assimilate some of those experiences into our own being. We can learn and we can grow from that. And some of them are so powerful. And I find myself, just like you, getting emotional over the older movies. Like tonight, true story, tonight I watched the end of Karate Kid, the first one. And maybe this is just because I'm in my mid 40s now. But I was crying at the end of it, right? Trying not to let my kids see me. Number one, it was the crane kick, and the martial arts is terrible in that movie, but it was the crane kick that he did because I remembered being a kid how magical that scene was for everybody, and the wax on, the wax off, and then what a neat character Pat Morita played as Mr. Miyagi, and it was
Mhm.
just such a feeling of nostalgia, and then realizing that a part of me is from that movie. Like, all these little movies shaped a part of who I am today because of how powerful they were. And seeing like some of these revisits like 20, 30 years later where they give a conclusion to the story where we're at a different stage of life, I
Yeah.
think just brings it to another level because it's part of our journey still.
It is, and that is a way that I think the myth and storytelling is such a hugely important piece of
Yeah,
humanity. And for us, that medium was presented, those archetypal stories were presented
yeah,
on TV, on movies. And, like it's so funny because I'm also feeling the nostalgia today.
yeah.
We have this amazing store up in St. Louis. It's called Record Exchange. It's like a hoarder's dream for vinyl, VHS, DVDs, turntables. Like they've got so much stuff packed in there. It's like a pack rat, just exploded records. Anyway, so I'd been in there a couple weeks ago with some friends and I didn't get nearly enough time to browse. And I saw that they had the big old-fashioned Highlander VHS box sets that have like the picture for like a scene from the
Yeah,
show.
and everything connect. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I went out and I bought them because I was like, those are awesome. Um, and that's a story that I really like. That again, it's that hero. Like one of the things you talk
Yeah.
when you were talking about like Karate Kid, they're not giving us stories about heroes anymore.
Yeah.
It's there's a denigration of the spirit in that, I think, that's very diabolical. And so I think
Yeah.
it's really now more than ever really important to kind of keep those older stories where there was a heroic experience alive. And that's why back to the Star Trek thing, those guys were heroes. They were
Yeah.
explorers. They they were something that people could emulate, and we really
It
are
was yeah.
struggling right now, I think, to have any of those inspirational kind of stories.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, I remember
and-
being a kid, I would watch those movies and I would become those characters,
yeah,
and I would embody them and like really try to do the things that they did and those admirable traits that they had. And you learn the hard lessons that they learned too. I mean, it's such a neat way to learn. I think, and through story is that incredible aspect of learning as you go through that process with them.
yeah, and I think that's why it's kind of being chiseled away, um,
Yeah.
because it is a powerful tool.
I was listening to it was a David Icke's it was a bunch of clips, but David Icke was one of the speakers. But the theme of this like 5 minute little YouTube video was talking about just the shift in music frequency from I forget the hertz that it's at,
538.
but
Yeah, I
I
think it's
think so. And it's
538.
down, yeah, and it's a different frequency now. And just the impact that has on our psyche and what it does to us versus, and you can feel the difference in certain music. And I think we are bombarded by a lot of things that don't necessarily serve our best interests and our spiritual evolution. I think there are some things that devolve us into that more animalistic fight or flight survival state. And it makes us like a powder keg, ample for suggestion and ready to explode at the easiest little trigger. I mean, this is evidenced by, and let me get your take on this as a vet as well. I know I'm segueing here, but recently in the news, one of the football players was catching a lot of heat right before Veterans Day. He was standing on one of the naval ships, and everybody has their hand over their heart during the national anthem, but he stood there with his hands down at his side. And right away, everybody's calling to just cancel this guy. Before hearing what his reasoning was, before any, like they're just furious at this guy. And I'm watching this unfold, and the first thing that comes through my mind is like, we have due process for a reason in this country. And we're so quick to want blood at the perception of wrongdoing that it doesn't even matter what the person's, whether they're guilty or innocent or whatever his reasoning was. And the other piece of that was, for me as a veteran, what my service means is that I'm going to give my life so you can do the things that I may not agree with, because
Right.
that's what freedom is. And to hear that just rhetoric over this guy, I don't have to like it, but I don't know his reasons. So, but he has the
That's
right to do it.
Yeah, that and I think that's a really important distinction. And one of the things that we don't really do anymore for people is the benefit of the doubt
Right.
or ask a follow-up question. Um,
Correct.
I know for me, because of my military experience and my um, if you have a less than than stellar military experience, or if you have ethical um, harm from what you've participated in, that really
Right.
does um make it hard for, like, I know it's for my personal self, it's made it hard for me to
Right.
be patriotic, and
Yeah.
I've struggled with, if you're at an event, and you're asked to have an outward demonstration of your patriotism,
Right.
if you're not really feeling super warm and fuzzy towards your country or towards the people in your country,
Right.
it would feel disingenuous to do that
Correct.
false thing. So,
Correct.
but he didn't like sit there and do something inappropriate. He
He was
was
respectful.
right, he was
He stood there
respectful,
quietly with his
right.
hands at his side.
Which would be the same thing if someone was engaged in a practice that I don't share, but I'm not going to be disrespectful. Um,
Correct.
and so I think the people who are getting really upset about that, they have the false virtue signaling
They
patriotism,
do.
which doesn't really, that kind of patriotism sends people to crappy wars that are fought for
Yes.
no reason. Like that
Correct.
kind of bang the drum, America, whatever, that's the
Right.
reason why we participated in some things, because no one was
Right.
sitting there going, wait a minute.
The great thing about America is I can say, hey, I'm pissed off at this country right now. There's a problem here. I'm
Yeah.
allowed to say that because it's protected. There's a reason why, so we can identify a problem instead of saying everything's always great and America's always great. We're not always so great. It doesn't mean I don't love my country very much, but we have problems right now.
Right.
And we don't even know if this guy was protesting. And he said, I'm not going to give this any press attention because that would put the spotlight on me and take away from veterans at Veterans Day. His father served in the 82nd Airborne. He grew up on military bases. So was this guy really like saying screw you military, or was he having his own reasons to not put his hand on his heart?
And
May
that's
never
what,
know. And
yeah, and nobody wants to ask that question or just go,
correct.
hey, let
Right.
it be. But there is this perception that we're all supposed to, I thought this was supposed to be a country of individuals, but we're
Right.
expected to fall into to alignment with things. And like you said earlier, there is that powder keg mentality where, and I
Right.
think that's especially since the election, as a empathic person who is more spiritually tuned than not, having to be around people who are so angry and so
Yeah.
frustrated and
Yep.
so whipped up, it has been incredibly draining. Um,
Yeah.
Things that just should have gone smoothly, or you're in spaces where suddenly, people are talking about something and it's like, whoa, I did not even realize I was in a room full of crazy people. And you
Right.
just want to go, you know,
and run away.
maybe.
Yeah. 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 I was listening to the Sean Ryan podcast, and I can't remember the guy he had on, but they were talking about all the disinformation that exists and all the different areas that it's. I mean, he was a government guy, a psyop guy, and he was talking about how China is doing it, how Russia's doing it, how our own government is doing it, and he ran through like people in the Obama administration and how this progressed to really how all of these different actors have divided this country so much. And I'm at the point now where if you're feeling angry about something you're hearing in the media, you're probably being manipulated. And even the conspiracies that are out there, and I'm not saying some of them aren't true, but the way they're dividing us, and I feel that we're being manipulated to fight. And if we could just stop and have a conversation without the anger, we could really solve some problems. But I think we all need to just take a step back and really think about what's happening here.
Well, and I think even more than that, I think we need to take a step in because
Yeah.
I'm a big, I didn't used to be, but I'm kind of turning into a big proponent of your outer landscape is a mirror for your inner landscape,
hmm
right?
hmm
And um, what all of this noise, which is what it all is, it's just noise from your YouTube feed to your
Right.
Twitter feed to your, all this media and news and all of this stuff is it's just signal noise. And
Yeah.
it's I think what a lot of it's designed to do is to tune out your inner world. Because in the inner world,
Absolutely.
you're going to find your connection to your creator. Uh,
hmm
you're going to find your connection to yourself. You're going to find out and hopefully figure out that you're a lot more um, significant than you maybe think you are. And you're going to figure out that all this stuff out here is just lies
Yeah.
and trickery. And that the only thing that's, you know, um, that's really going to resonate is going to be the soul truth stuff that's going to be coming from within. And this world makes it so hard to have
Right.
that inner experience
Right.
because everything is outer focused. Look what these people are doing. Look at that. Look at, and it's just this outer, 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 and you have to learn how to tune in to the inner. Otherwise, you're never, I think personally,
Right.
my opinion, you're never going to be able to see through the lies of this place unless
Right.
you learn to quietly tune in because there's so much lying going on that it's just insane.
I agree. It's very, very good advice. And I'm thinking of two examples here. Somebody once said, I know I've said it before, anybody can go sit in a cave and find enlightenment, right? The challenge is in everyday life, being able to tap into that spiritual side of you while dealing with the hustle and bustle of everything going on, having a family, having a career, having friends, having a social life, dealing with the hardships, and still finding that inner peace. And I just listened to an interview with Joe McMonagle. And what he said resonated with me. He says, a lot of remote viewers, he's like when he was in the military program, they wanted everything to be clean. The plain white room, everything clean, no noise, no distraction, no colors, because you don't want to influence it. And he goes, but that's not reality. He says, so I train myself to remote view in a crowded location, in a crowded place, because I want to be able to access this state, this experience, this knowledge anytime that I need it. I was so happy to hear him say that because Daz Smith, who trained me, he has a similar outlook, and him and I have talked about this, and he's told me that he's done remote viewing sessions on the bus. I learned how to remote view when my kids were, toddlers. So I'd be sitting there in my house trying to do a remote viewing session, and my kids are in diapers walking around, making all the noise, watching TV. And I've gained such a benefit. Is it great when I can sit somewhere quiet and do a session? Absolutely, I love it. But there's something to be gained for being able to access that inner peace while chaos is happening all around us. Because right now, chaos is happening all around us, and we need to be able to tune that out and tune into ourselves to find that guidance because it's not coming from the media, it's not coming from out
No,
there.
it can't. And by design, it won't.
Correct.
I think.
Yeah.
All you're going to get out there, like I said, is noise. And
Yeah.
there was a description of how to like listen in. Somebody, there's someone I like, he calls it like listening, tuning into your inner tuning fork.
Right.
And that's something I've been really working on a lot lately to kind of to try to differentiate when I'm encountering information or, like, because I'm an avid listener
Yeah.
of ideas. I have my little bevy, people like YouTubers or philosophers, things that I, resonate with, ideas and things like that. But I'm always, if you're encountering just, hey, new ideas or somebody's telling me something, I'm really starting lately to try to tune into my body and go, okay, where does this hit me? Because if I'm getting like a clenched energy and I'm just like, or if immediately I'm filled with like this dread and fear, and I'm like, oh, this isn't good information for me. Like my inner
Right.
self goes, nope, this is BS.
Right.
We're not falling for this. This is fear-based stuff, and we don't have to deal with it.
Right.
Um, so that's what I've been kind of doing a lot lately because I do think our body in connection with spirit is capable of kind of being a little bit more perceptive than we might think. But some of
I,
us,
I
I
agree.
think we're so used to listening to this um, cortisol generating fear
Right.
stuff that we get
Right.
kind of hooked on that.
Back to that, related to what you're saying, the Joe McMoneagle interview, he was talking about how, after the Cold War had ended, he was over to Russia and he was meeting some of his counterparts in the psychic realm. And what they said is that the Russians were selecting their psychic spies based on people who had great records in combat in terms of survivability. Because it showed that they're listening to something deeper, right? They have that inner voice. And I thought about that, and I thought about a lot of the situations that I've been in and how I've been in a lot of situations where I'm like, that could have gone really bad and it didn't, or I got out of there before the bad thing happened because I'm tapped into things. There's times like as a cop, people are like losing their mind and I just knew what to say to them and they'd be like, "Oh, okay." And we would just calm down and de-escalate because I listen to that inner thing when I'm getting to that fear state. Now I'm challenging you. Now we're getting all angry and we're going to fight as opposed to calming down and really asking myself, what does this person need as opposed to what do I need them to do because I'm afraid? There's a big difference there. And I was
Huge.
able to navigate through those things with great success.
Yeah. And I do think it is learning how to navigate the world, which is part of
Yeah.
that process, I think, where I'm at a lot. I did years and years of the spiritual seeking stuff. And
Yeah.
did years and years, which I'm still, kind of trying to fine tune some of that. And then I did years and years of truth seeking, which led me down every rabbit hole imaginable. And so I'm at the point where I know for me what my truth is.
Right.
I have a vague kind of notion that spiritually I'm going to have to kind of put together a little jigsaw puzzle of stuff because unfortunately for me, I can't just go to a shelf and pick out like a spirituality.
Yeah. Same.
There is not one that fits what's going up in here,
Right.
so I,
Right.
I have to kind of DIY it. Uh, which leads to a bit of loneliness because I don't necessarily align with there's parts of Christianity that I appreciate. I'm studying
Right.
Druidism. There's parts of all of these things, but um none of it all fits. So I'm gonna try to have to make it fit.
Yeah.
But the big challenge is how do you live in the world with that?
Right.
How do you
Right.
cross that bridge to like, okay, now
Yeah.
that I figured all this stuff out, what the hell am I supposed to do with it?
Yeah. I went down that path years ago, going from Christianity. And we may have talked about this
A
before,
little bit.
and then I went down the pagan path for a while and I was really into Wicca for a while as like a solitary practitioner. Um, and it's funny, I was so angry at Christianity because, my beliefs changed so drastically. And I don't consider myself a Christian, but I came, in a circle here where it's like, oh, now I can respect what those teachings are. Like I'm not angry anymore about it. Like it served a very good purpose for me and I've learned a lot from it. And I think there are some great spiritual truths within that religion. That's just not how I choose to express my own spirituality. Um, but now I can talk to anybody about religion. I mean, I remember being in mosques when I was in Bosnia, talking to the imams about their spirituality, and so to be able to have those common conversations and really you take things away from it, because you start to understand that there's just universal elements of truth. We all just access the divine in a different way that serves us individually.
No, and I definitely I definitely think because I know from my experience in meditation and journeying that divine presence is very much there. There
Yeah,
is something there. And what what kind of pains me a lot and it saddens me is that I think for a lot of folks on the truth journey or um they're always looking outside and they're not necessarily looking for a spiritual solution to a lot
right.
of things. They're looking for a cause or a boogeyman or a reason or um, and they're not realizing that some of what they might be struggling with or some of what they might be experiencing as being difficult is actually more of a spiritual problem than a world problem. And
Yeah,
that's where I think that that outer focus versus inner focus. I just wish for some folks, they might have these mystical experiences, but they don't necessarily, it doesn't like get into their bones, you know?
yeah.
It doesn't
Well,
change.
everybody takes it to a different length, and I say this without judgment. I mean, we all have our own journeys. And I think that fear state, right? I'm afraid, and then the rebellious, like I'm going to uncover the truth, and I'm going to wake everybody up. Like like that was motivating. Like I learned a lot because you're like, man, I'm afraid of what's out there, and I need to know.
Right.
And you spend all these hours and hours and weeks and years like doing all this research and research and research. But I think where the trap happens is when it becomes an echo chamber. And now you're not learning anything new. You're not getting these new ideas of things to explore. You're reinforcing these ideas that you've already had. And it's when you get to that point where you're like, okay, this is the same stuff and you're getting your dopamine, but you're not growing anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point where it's like, let me start seeing what kind of control I can have here. What's this mean to me? How do I fit into this? And when you start asking those questions, and really what it comes down to is like, who am I? Right? What's my purpose? What is my journey here? When you start really diving into that, I think that's when you start to open a whole new world of possibility and the fear starts to go away. It's still
It
there,
does.
but it's not driving the train anymore.
Well, and I think because so much of the fear hinges on the fact of the unknown and people who think that this is all there is. If
Right.
you think that this is all there is, and you think that people are destroying the earth and all of this stuff, and this is all there is, that creates this massive sense of panic, But
Right.
if you're like, there is so much more going on here than I remotely am able to comprehend,
Right.
that takes away that fear because it's like, I'm not in charge here. There's
Right.
something else that is making those decisions. Uh,
Correct.
and that kind of not to say you're not responsible, but that
I
like to
was
realize your role is not
I was just gonna say the same thing, took the words out of my mouth. It's like but it's hard not to because you're watching this and it's personal to you as you're watching this thing happen. Like, especially like right now, it's like time to take action now. Go out and vote. Go do your part. And it's like, well, where were you for the last 4 years? What have you been doing besides casting your little vote, right? How are you making an impact? And we have to realize that us as individuals are probably not going to be the one person that changes everything in the world, right? But how can we impact our communities? What can we do? Like I have a community of people that I interact with every single day, and every single day I try to make their lives a little bit happier, a little bit better. Like I'm contributing. That's my contribution. That's what my purpose is right now to helping this world. I'm not going to impact the political sphere right now. I'm not going to impact what's happening with the wars going on in the world. I have my opinions. I do my meditations, I'm spreading peace at this level. And hopefully that level then spreads at other levels. I'm just one node among many that is
Right.
choosing to accept a particular frequency and project it.
Yeah, because you're operating in the jurisdiction with which you're currently planted.
Correct. Yes.
And I think that that's one of the things that I find it interesting. It's got to be like a generational thing. I think because I don't remember being a lot of this. I think it was just kind of being taught a lot in schools when I was kind of coming up with this uh activism
Yeah.
kind of mindset and that you have to change the world.
Yeah.
Um, we see that a lot of that in the spiritual community or the new age community with the star seed kind of
Right.
concept that all of these supposedly
System system
children
busters.
are were, they're can you imagine being a kid and taught that, oh, you're a rainbow or a crystal child and you're a star seed and you're here to change the world. You're here to fix the planet.
Yeah.
Like that kind of pressure on a
Right.
it's like no.
I think for a child, that's a lot to process. I try not to go down that rabbit hole too much, but I think that you're creating this rebellious nature. You're creating conflict, right? And that's going to perpetuate more conflict when you view it that way, in my opinion, that energy.
Well, and you're also making a grand assumption that you're assuming that the world is broken. What if this
Right.
world is operating exactly how God
This
intends it to
this
be?
might be how it's supposed to be. This might be the design.
Yeah.
But then fighting it might be part of that journey too, right? And having that feeling. Like I look at, being in education and being neurodivergent myself, like hearing this star seed, you're a system buster. Like I have oppositional defiant disorder. Like I fight every bit of authority, simple stuff too. Like I just, I've learned to control it, but like I want to rebel against everything. So like, yeah, and when I look at kids who are neurodivergent, a system tells them you're wrong. You're not learning the right way. You can't. And they're like, I'm brilliant. I'm just going to do it on my own terms. And I'm going to look at the way you do things and I'm going to find a better way to do it. And that's what I see all the time with a lot of these kids. So I think that there is some change going on, but I think putting some of these stories behind it, right? And putting that pressure on a child and saying this is your role, I don't think is
Yeah.
appropriate, especially for a young soul.
And what people get hemmed up with is, like I said, is the activism element of that you're here
Yeah,
to fix something. And it's like, if we all just worked on fixing ourselves,
right,
so much of the problems would go away because and again it goes back to this outer inner focus. Everybody wants
right.
to fix your behavior but they're really not so concerned about their own,
Yeah,
and I think that's where a lot of us get in trouble because we're not living as effectively or as tuned in as we could, and so much of the structure of life does not teach us how do you live in a way that's truly connected after you've kind of had your spiritual epiphany and but you've still got to like go to work and mow the lawn and pay taxes and do all that
right,
stuff. Like how do you do that spiritually, especially if you're not kind of like in a mainstream religious structure?
right,
That's
right.
hard.
It is. It's hard navigating that. I did a meditation, I don't know, a few months ago. I talked about this in one of my podcasts. And it was a beautiful meditation. I don't always have visuals, and this one I had visuals. And it's similar to what you were just talking about with, I had all this light coming down, these different rays of light, different points of the earth. And I heard this voice in my head, and it was basically just teaching me like there are people here that hold a particular frequency that does bring healing, and that there were certain areas of the earth where the energy was damaged or drained or changed, but their purpose was simply to hold the frequency. They may not even know, like in this meditation, they may not even know that that's their purpose. Just existing and being who they are, it, like,
Is
it,
enough.
like, that's all that it takes. Like I said, like I just interact with the people in my community just by being myself. I don't have to try to change anything. It was just holding that frequency, really, of love,
Yep.
is really what it was. And that has such an impact on it because you're not thinking, conflict, fight, struggle, because that's what's already coming at us. So if you're Martin, Dr. King, hate can't drive out hate, only love can. Darkness can't drive out darkness, only light can. You know, I take that as a very powerful statement in when I'm dealing with those kinds of things.
No, that's such a I think that's such a valuable point because and what it does is it for I think for a lot of folks, especially if you've gone through trauma or you're trying to heal or you're just growing up in a world that feels really, really fractured, having the knowledge that like permission that it's just okay to be, I think is a
Right.
huge deal because again, so many of us have these either what we view as societal pressures or even self-imposed that we have to be more, we have to be better, we have to figure it out. Like, I've struggled with that a lot. Like, I have to figure out how to get out of this place. Like,
Yeah.
what's the magic decoder ring that I have to figure out so that when I die this time, I don't come back here.
Right.
I want to go to the next thing. That kind of self-induced pressure to figure it out. That for me drove me for a lot of years.
It's interesting. In one of a lot of meditation stories are coming up today. In one of my recent meditations, I go through one of the things I did. I go through a chakra meditation, and I visualize, working through all of my energy centers. And I found a scroll. It was weird. I found a scroll in my throat chakra, and throat chakra, simulates communication with yourself and with the outside world. And I removed it, and it was like a splinter, but it was a scroll. And I opened it up, and the message in the scroll was, I don't belong here. I need to get out of here. But it wasn't that I was getting this message that I don't belong here. It was that this was a signal that was inserted into my energy field, trying to convince me that I don't belong here. It was such an insightful thing. Like, maybe I do belong here. Maybe this is just an external signal that I was able to remove from my own system during that meditation, that I do, in fact, belong here. It was such a cool, I mean, it's just like a big splinter that I pulled out. And I was like, whoa, look at this. Very random.
Neat. That's a
Yeah.
good one. I like that.
Yeah. That was
Because and
pretty
I
cool.
do because if you look at like at least what it's been presented as historical, sages or wise people, they go off to the
Right.
mountain somewhere and they contemplate whatever. Um, they never talk about bringing that wisdom back to the village and like incorporating.
Right.
Oh, they just live out their time so then they can, ascend,
Right.
which I really
Right.
hate the ascension kind of. Uh,
Right.
but it there has been I think a historic disavowing of the material world, the material realm, this place. And
Right.
it's not that I don't like
Right.
the material. I love the material. I mean,
Hmm.
material possessions or like I like some material stuff.
Yeah. I
Food,
like my stuff.
I'm all about that. I don't want to go live in some spiritual realm where I can't have pork chops or apple pie or like no,
Right.
I that's heaven. Like there should be
Right.
food in heaven. I don't want to be so spiritually enlightened my body no longer requires sustenance. I'm like, no,
Right.
doesn't sound fun.
Right.
So I love the material realm. I just don't like the buffoonery that's going on in this material realm. I'm like, can I skip over to like another material realm? Because this one just isn't quite fun. But I do think, there is this expectation that, oh, if I'm spiritual or I'm enlightened or I'm, you are kind of focused on getting out, again, that external framework. But so often we don't dig into our life here. Like we don't learn anything about like the world we live in.
Right.
We have all this tech and all this information and all this stuff, but most of us can't identify a tree by name, like, or a plant. We can't make our own food. We can't,
Right.
there's so much stuff we can't even do. And those tasks, those things I think could be reframed to be a bit more spiritual, like
Right.
digging into your life in a spiritual way. But we get so focused on and I'm as guilty of it as the next person because I
Right. Me too.
spent a lot of years trying to like, how do I get out of here?
Yeah. Yes. And I think the key to that, in my opinion, is when we can take those moments to slow down, right? Like, I'm not a fan of cooking just because my life is so busy. But when I have those moments, when I can sit there with my daughter and turn off the phone, turn off the TV, and it's just me and her, and she's showing me how she makes scrambled eggs, there's something spiritual in that of itself, right? Just taking that time to appreciate those small moments and not worrying about everything else that's out there. And then it's just enriching for me. And there's things that I'm learning about myself and learning about her, and she's learning about the world and about her own capabilities. So I think it's those little moments where we can shut everything else out. And again, there's some inner work that's happening there, right? We're quieting
Yeah.
all of that noise and just trying to have an experience and appreciate but not overindulge, because I think that's also an aspect of this spiritual journey, and the challenge in finding the balance in this world is that there are some things that are so pleasing to us and now they're so readily available to us. We are overstimulated, we're on overload, and we're like drug addicts, and we just can't seem to get enough until we're just dull. It doesn't give us the rush or the thrill or the high anymore, and we have to detox from it and then just take it in, gradually in moderation and in balance in order to really appreciate it.
No, and I think that the balance part is really, I think, critical in terms of that's where I know, like for me, like we talk, I I have overindulged in, especially like I said, I like the material realm. I like stuff,
Right.
my
Yeah.
books, my DVDs, all that kind of stuff. Thankfully, I was never a shoe girl or a handbag girl. I mean, give
Right.
me a nice DVD box set. That's or
Yeah.
um so that was where, yeah, I definitely overindulged and I look at all, I'm like, oh, I have too much, you know. So,
Right.
yeah, and there is a lot of that of just trying to go, okay, what do I really need? What resonates? What doesn't anymore? And those things are going to shift and change as you age and over time.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what resonated with you at 15 might
Mm-hmm.
not work when you're, 50. And
Right.
I think being able to change course has been really um helpful for me to be able to like realize, oh, I don't have to be wedded to this idea or this concept anymore just because it works
Right.
for me at a
Right.
particular time. That doesn't mean that it's something I have to carry with me forever. Uh,
It serves me right now. It's a tool, even thought tools, right? Even different, as we talked about earlier, even different beliefs, even different religions, like those tools serve us at a particular point in time, but we may evolve or shift or change, and that particular lens may not work for us anymore. And that's okay to discard that or put that down and pick up a new tool to navigate this next stage of your life, because our lives are constantly evolving and changing. And it gives us variety and excitement and new opportunities for learning when we're looking at things through a different perspective or trying new experiences or trading one thing for another.
it does. And when you were talking, it just kind of reminded me of like you climb the mountain and you plant your flag.
Right,
You see, oh, wait, there's another mountain, and that's going to require a different
right,
skill set and a different flag.
right.
And you're going to get to the top of that, and you're like, this is it. I figured out everything. And you're like, oh, crap, there's another mountain, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And I'm thankful for that. What I've learned for me, that my mountains are my questions,
Yeah.
and no matter when, I still remember, it was traumatic for me at the time. I was involved with somebody who just ripped into me one day. She's like, "You're the weirdest person I ever met. You're never gonna find out answers about aliens and all this spirituality stuff you want to know." And I can honestly say, at the things I wanted to know at that point in my life, I figured out. Like I really did. I can also say I don't have a clue what the hell is going on right now, because once you get your answers, you should have so many more questions. And I think that's what keeps us going. That's what keeps us growing. There are times when I get to the top of that mountain and I go, "Oh, there's another one." Like I just want to sit. I don't want to climb anymore. But I'm thankful for those opportunities to keep growing and keep learning and keep trying new things. That's what keeps life interesting.
It is. And it's funny because I definitely can relate to your, another mountain thing. Because that's where I'm at right now is I'm
Yeah.
really trying to figure out that balance between And I kind of view it in terms of a masculine and feminine kind of vibe.
Right.
Because I think this road, especially if you're on a kind of a spiritual path type of thing, or self-discovery, spiritual discovery, whatever, I think we don't necessarily look at it in terms of how it's going to relate for men versus how that journey might be um, unfolding for women. And those might be different kinds of experiences. And a lot of times I don't ever see people discussing it that way. And for me lately, because I was always coming at a lot of this stuff in a what I would construe as a very masculine way, intellectual seeking, the
Mm.
sources that I would be looking at are usually male and really smart dudes who have figured out stuff and they're picking things apart and it's very
Right.
cerebral, it's very analytical. Um, but oftentimes there's a real big heart piece that's missing out of all of that. It's
Yes.
like
Yeah.
you might not have, these guys are like, there's a for anybody remotely interested in biblical, uh, like decoding from a Gnostic perspective, there's a guy, Marty Leeds. He has a Gnostic Academy. He will just shred the Bible and tell all you all the astrological stuff and the
Hmm.
numerology and all that. It's fascinating on an intellectual level.
Right.
But I'm like, there's a there's a faith part, there's a heart
Mhm.
part that's just not in there. And for me as a
Right.
woman, now I'm at this point where I'm like, I have to figure out how to relate to more of this stuff from my
Right.
femininity, which is going to be different. It's more receptive, less
Right.
actively engaged mentally. It's like, okay, how do I embody these things and feel them as opposed to think them? Because I've been doing a
Right.
lot of thinking, not necessarily feeling. And I think
Yeah.
that's the female half of that.
Yeah.
So
It's
that's how
it's
it's
that.
relating to me, I think.
No, that's a great way to explain it. I mean, and I'm kind of been the opposite. I mean, I am such a big feeler, and that has always leads me. And then there's times where I have so many feelings, and I understand my feelings, but it's like, now how do I intellectualize what I'm experiencing, right? How do I find that? How do I now go find those sources that prove all these
Right.
feelings that I'm
What you've
having?
been
What does this
feeling,
mean?
you just want the
Right.
backup for it, right? Yeah.
Right. So now I got to take these feelings like as an author and I got to put these feelings into words and I have to back these up and make sure that they're credible. So it's a tough balance to find because this feels so strong and
Yeah.
this is so stubborn and right and talks you out of things and you got to make sure they work well together. Otherwise, you just get lost in everything, when they become in this conflict. So finding that balance and that sweet spot, it's not an easy thing to do.
No, and it's the alchemical marriage. It's what
Yeah.
alchemists have struggled with from the dawn of time, of that you have this inner divine, you have that
Right.
inner opposite within you, and you have to find a way to rectify those two opposites into a cohesive whole.
Yeah.
And from a spiritual perspective, I think that's a very difficult thing to do, but um it's definitely like where I'm at focused of trying to go, okay, I've really, my career was military. And I mean, I joined at the as a girl. What did I do? I
Right.
joined the pinnacle of male dominated environments. I trained
Right.
for pilots. I like breathe, like it would be me in a room with 50 dudes, like
Yeah.
squadrons of fighter pilots and stuff. And then even after my role as a civilian, intelligence analyst, very cerebral. Even my spiritual pursuits, they were always more intellectual than actually
Right. Right.
connected. And so I hyper developed that intellectual side, but I did not do the other part. So now
Right.
I feel like I'm kind of having to backtrack and kind of
Yeah.
do the other side. So,
But that's a new part of the journey, and what that does is I think it gives you unique insights into things that you may understand intellectually,
yeah.
and now you're looking at it from a different perspective, and there's even more growth that comes from that aspect of, again, the inner work is what you're doing.
Yeah. It's just I wasn't expecting it to be so icky sometimes. You're just sort of stuck. You're like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Yeah. I think that's part of it. I mean, there's times where it's like, man, I really feel stuck, and that goes on for months, sometimes a year or two, where you're like, I need to progress. And I think I think we get information sometimes. Sometimes I get it in the form of a download where it's like, all right, I think I understand this, but you really need to fully assimilate it and
Yeah,
accept it and understand it and start to live it and embody it before you're ready for the next piece, before the next stage. You can only really accept as much as you're able to process and understand. And it takes time. I feel that our receptors sometimes it's like we're on dial-up, right? And we download this huge packet and we're like, oh man, I got it. This is amazing. I got aliens and inner Earth and other dimensions. And you're like, what the hell does it mean? And then it takes a long time for everything to unpack and for you to understand it. And then once you do, you're like, okay. And now you've got dozens, if not hundreds of new questions that lead to more of those big experiences. But it takes a while. It takes a while to assimilate it all.
it does. It's funny because like for months, my tarot cards would be just like, you're in a transitional period. You're in a transition period. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Uh-huh.
what am I transitioning to? Like,
Right. Where are
throw
we
me a
going?
bone on that one, like, give me something here.
Yeah.
But and I think that too is um I spent a lot of years trying to figure out everything. And now
Right.
I figured out enough to know that there's stuff I'm not gonna figure out. I have enough where I'm like, okay, I think I get what's going on here. Um, and that I could spend the rest of my life trying to intellectually figure it out.
Right.
And that might be interesting, but I don't know that for me that would be fulfilling. So
Right.
part of like where I'm trying to figure out like is giving myself permission to like to have another to go in a different direction. Like I was questing, in this one particular direction for so long and it's like, okay, how do I shift gears into realizing
Right.
that that road was just never ending. Like you're always going to have another rabbit hole, you're always going to have another
Correct.
question, you're always going to have another intellectual summit to scale and it's like, do I really want to do that? And I'm like, no, I don't think I do. So then now what? Like,
Right.
what do you do when you've abandoned that particular quest? I'm trying to figure that part out.
I feel like this reality has like a video game, right? Like an RPG. We have our quest and we have our journey, and there are so many fascinating side quests that are enriching for us to fulfill our journey and our mission. And some of them we have to go on these side quests, but sometimes we get stuck in the side quest and we lose track of the path. And I think once we recognize that and ask the question, like, where am I supposed to be? It's not always immediate, but we gradually shift back on where we need to go. But those side quests, they're very entertaining, they're alluring, they're addicting to get pulled down there. And
Well,
we all
I
do it.
think
I
you
think
learn a
they're
lot.
essential. Yeah.
I wouldn't change the fact that I spent a lot of years researching. I learned some fascinating things and it
Yeah.
allowed like it gave me a mental flexibility where I no longer have the hubris to know to believe that I have it all figured out because that
Yeah.
ship sailed a long time ago.
Yep.
Um, it, it's helping me to be less judgmental against people because I'm like, remember, Courtney, you have held some dumb ideas too. Remember back in the day, like
Yeah.
um so it's helping me to like be more compassionate to people who might not hold the same opinions. Um
Yeah. Well,
and yeah,
I've looked at, my first podcast in like this genre that I did. It was about flat Earth, right? Now, and it was a question. I said the Earth is flat, and it was a question. But I had watched that flat Earth documentary, and I remember watching it, going, "Wow, this is a really good documentary." I don't think it proves the Earth is flat at all. Like, not at all. It doesn't do a good job of. But they asked some really good questions. They uncovered some amazing anomalies that don't make sense, things that I want to explore further in my life. And when I went through that process, I was like, I don't have to agree
right.
to learn something. I can completely disagree with your conclusion, but I still learned so much. And when we can hold that reverence for anybody's belief system and take value from it, I think it really it brings us to a whole new level.
And that's what I find really interesting sometimes is the lack of curiosity with some of
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. Because if you take a subject like flat Earth, or hollow Earth, or any of the alternatives of what our perception of the globe is,
right,
um, so often folks come at that with such derision, that their immediate that's the biggest insult that you could give to somebody is to call them a flat
right,
earther. You're assuming they're stupid,
right,
assuming they're an idiot and they don't know any
right,
better, and they don't have the wherewithal to look at the world and just know like that
right,
everybody else believes. And so many people don't give them the benefit of the doubt and go, wait a minute, what what drove this person to that
right,
conclusion? Because
right,
obviously it would have probably had to been an interesting experience. Like, how did you come to that conclusion?
right.
Because that's not an like nobody wakes up and goes, you know what? I want to be the laughing stock of the internet. I want to
Yeah,
say that the earth is flat.
right.
They don't do that. Like, it's a lot of them, like, they're like, I did not want to be here. This was not the boat I wanted to be.
Yeah. Yeah. But they
Uh,
see something that they can't
right.
unsee
They
and
can't unsee.
they have to figure it out.
Right. And
Right?
and that might be a stopping over point for some
Yeah.
folks. They might go,
Right.
okay, hey, I don't for a lot of because I do know a lot of people in that community. A lot of them are like, I don't know what this is, but I know I'm not spinning.
Right.
So, the math doesn't always add up with some of the other stuff. But I think the biggest takeaway is we don't always give people enough credit to realize that that's scary to like break your worldview of
Paradigm shift is
your
traumatic.
nature of reality. That
Yeah.
takes balls to like
Yeah.
intellectually jump there and go, yeah, maybe that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
And so many people want to deride them for it. And it's like, no, ask them how they got there, because that's
Right.
an interesting story, I think.
Yes, and they have this passion. And the other piece, I'm thinking as a teacher now, right? Like it's very hard to just teach somebody something. We have to let our students experience something. And the school I'm at, like we let our kids problem solve and we let them fail because that's when they figure it out. Use the scientific method. They design and experiment. That's what a lot of these flat earthers are doing. They come up with these genius ways, right? As amateur scientists to try to figure out the curvature of the, like things that yeah, you guys who study science and physics and, whatever, understand very well because you went to school for that. But for these amateurs to go out and, okay, maybe they make these overzealous claims sometimes. Here's my proof. But they're trying to learn, they're trying to teach themselves something. And we're so quick to mock them instead of saying, wow, you put a lot of time into trying to figure this out. It's like we're celebrating their failure. And
Right.
that's frustrating because it's like we're trying to learn something and failure is a part of the learning process and we should be supportive and saying, okay, what next? What other like I'd rather we asked questions that would lead them to maybe come to a certain conclusion as opposed to just being, you idiot, why are you wasting your time? Because learning is such a beautiful thing and we're so quick to dismiss it when it seems weird to us.
Right. And because I think the scariest thing for a lot of people was what if they're right? Like,
Yeah.
I would call it like
Yes.
that's a whole can of worms that a lot of people aren't going to willing to look at.
Correct.
They're like, oh no, this can't be real because I've
Right.
based my entire whatever. And again, this comes back to realm of lies.
Yeah.
It's very hard to know what anything here is true. But what I
Right.
like about people in any of these alternative kind of camps is they're trying to figure like experientially explore this place and see what it has to tell us. And that's kind of
Right.
like what I like about like more nature-based religions, or you're looking at what can I learn about God from God's creation?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily from the book that somebody left who they say was written by
Correct.
divine hands. It's like, okay, well, that's nice. There could be some benefit in there.
Right.
It's like, okay, if God made anything, God made this place. So like what can we learn about, you
Right.
know, this place? And That's what I like about the flat earthers, that they're out there with their P900 cameras and they're taking stuff, they're doing,
Right,
and they're just trying to figure out what's going on. Or like people who are like, hey, I want to experience God in the creation.
right,
What can this teach me? And being more experiential about it than versus, well, somebody told me this is the truth, and so
right.
that's what I believe. We're taught to believe all kinds of stuff that are probably not true
There's
because
a
somebody
difference between believing and knowing based on experience, right? I remember when I was in a state of believing, and then I remember I went out into nature and I had experiences, and I realized that, the stories in these religious texts are great. They share the divine experiences that people had. But what I didn't know until I did it is that those experiences never stopped. It's a natural part of the human condition to experience the divine, to have the mystical and the strange and the supernatural come to you, because there's lessons to be learned there. But when you're stuck in reading someone else's teachings and only someone else's teachings, you think, oh, that happened to them. That can't happen to me because I'm not chosen. But
right.
everyone is chosen. Everyone has the choice to go have that experience. You just have to, again, slow down and look at the world around you.
And be open to not necessarily having an answer. It's like
Right,
there's an astronomical phenomenon. There's a I don't know if he counts as a podcaster or a radio guy. There's a guy named Pro 777. And he, several years ago, he captured this really interesting astrological phenomenon he called the lunar wave. He was taking high resolution video of the moon, full moon, and
right.
all of a sudden in the picture, it's like the resolution of the moon shifted. Like there was this
Huh,
wave, this line, like the screen reset when
right.
he's looking at the moon. He's like, well, that's freaking weird. What the hell is that? Since then, several other people have captured it, but it looked like the moon was a giant plasma screen that had a little bit of a shimmer
Oh,
to it.
wow. Yeah,
It's like I can look at something like that and go, I don't know what the heck that is, but it's interesting.
yeah,
And I'm going to go, it, I'm just trying to take these experiences or these something I'll see or hey and go, okay, maybe there's more going on than we've been taught or that we think. And then I'm open to the world and the creator, the divine, showing me what I need to
right.
see to, broaden my perspective. Because,
The other
you know, it's
the
like,
other piece of
what
that
I
is
have?
all of those things may be true. The earth might be flat and round at the same time. You know, we really don't understand the nature of reality, and it may be whatever we need it to be to serve our own individual journeys. There's so much we don't understand. So we may have this shared collective reality that we exist in, but then we also pull back into our own reality where for me, the earth is flat, right? And that is true, and I can prove it. But then when I come back to this collective reality, everybody's telling me that it's not. But my belief, my perception is that the earth is flat and that's where I live. We just don't know. There's so much we don't understand about the nature of reality. And maybe some physicists can tell me I'm completely off my rocker, and that's fine.
No, I think you're
This is
not
my
on your
journey.
rocker. I think
Right.
that because for I do think it kind of like a choose your own adventure kind of
Yes,
thing.
I
Like
agree.
those books from the 80s, which were pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because yeah, and a lot of it is based on your perception and your ability to perceive. Like I
Yes.
don't think that the divine, that God is going to show you something that you're not capable of handling. Otherwise,
Right.
your little wires are going to fry out, like
Right.
so I just don't think that's the case. And I think for for some folks, their perception of reality shifts quite a bit. And for
Hmm.
some folks, they're quite content, and the ball and space is something that captures that imagination,
Yeah.
So I think it's going to depend on where people are in life.
I've had so many experiences where I swear I get just a glimpse of a second of the universe's manipulation, just a little clues here and there. And it really makes me pause and think, is this, and then I think about the fact that like I'm living in a time where all the things I used to fantasize about as a kid are happening all around me, and I'm a part of it. Like just being a part of this viewing community, it's mind blowing to me that I get to do this, right? That I get to have these conversations with these amazing people, that I'm witnessing the UAP disclosure slowly unfold in front of me. Like I just happen to be alive during this time when all these exciting things are happening. It really makes me wonder, like, what's really happening here? As
See,
I
and
get to
that's
have this.
I love that because that's like your reality
Right,
bubble, right? For me, a lot of what I'm being shown and guided to is a lot more like earth stuff.
right,
Learning how to like um I've got a erosion problem and a massive issue going on like in my backyard. So it's like I'm being drawn to like how do I heal my land? How do I
right,
dig into so like a lot of the folks that I'm listening to are inspired by, they're like homesteaders and hey, how do we
right,
get back to like living naturally with the world and different kinds of architecture that's going to be more conducive to human health, all that kind of stuff.
right,
So it's yeah, I think it is a very interesting time because we have so many different little avenues.
right,
They're really going to speak to who we are, and we're not all programmed or built the same, and we're all going to like
right.
different kinds of stuff. So, yeah.
Collectively, we're all learning our piece and we're all contributing to whatever that greater mind is, I would think,
Yeah.
as we all continue to grow and evolve. Courtney, we've covered a lot tonight. It was insightful, it was uplifting, exploring all of these things. I thank you for sharing, your thoughts and your wisdom on it. As we're drawing to a close on this discussion, any final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
I think the big thing, again, I can only kind of really speak to the stuff that's been hitting me hard. And what's been coming up a lot for me lately is the world of spirit. I think it's very easy to kind of dismiss that side of things sometimes.
Right,
And also to feel like you have to, in order to have that spiritual development, that you have to pick a camp or pick a side or pick a book or
right,
join a church or whatever. And as a person who can't do any of those things um I just want to stress, especially in times that seem kind of dark and um where everything has got you focused outwards.
yeah,
I think the best thing that we can do to quiet that noise is to tune inwards
yeah,
and to find those moments of resonance, those conversations that matter, the shows that really capture something or something that makes us cry or, just whatever that
yeah,
is, and hold on to those because the world is kind of weird right now and who knows what's going to happen. And so I think we really do need to capture those things that really touch our spirit,
yeah.
not just our intellect, but our hearts as well. So
Yeah, it grounds us and reminds us, kind of who we are and why we're here. Beautifully said.
thank you.
Courtney, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I love every opportunity I have to talk to you, and I'm sure we'll do it again. When the time is right, that's when we te seem to connect when we
Yep.
need to. So I'll be looking forward to that. So, on behalf of Courtney and the rest of the Future Forecasting Group, which you can find at futureforecastinggroup.com, I'm Dennis Nappy II. Thanks for watching.